Big week of fantasy football coming up, and our defenses are still crushing it. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm the only fantasy football YouTuber who covers defense on a weekly basis multiple times a week. So go down to our first tier right here. We've got the Bills defense at number 1 this week. They're taking on the Tennessee Titans, and man, my plan of going with defenses, anybody who takes on the Tennessee Titans, yeah, it's a good plan, because Will Levis is atrocious. He is a turnover machine. Anybody he plays, doesn't matter how good the defense is or how bad the defense is, this guy is turning the ball over constantly. And the good thing with the Bills is not only are they getting after the quarterback, they're getting turnovers. They have 6 interceptions this year, and they've got 6 forced fumbles this year. So the Bills defense, they're hitting on all the metrics that we need in fantasy football by making the big plays, by making the turnovers happen. I think the Bills are in line for a major smash win this week, not only in the NFL game, but I think in defense and fantasy football, they're going to be a fantastic play. Number 1 here in week 7. And number 2 and 3, we've got the Thursday night matchup teams, the Broncos and the Saints defense, going up against each other in New Orleans this week. Listen, outside of Alvin Kamara, this is not a fantasy game. Except when you're talking about the defenses. This is not a fantasy playmakers game. You don't play a lot of the offensive side, but the defenses here are going to be excellent. This is one of the lower over-unders of the entire week. The Saints are obviously ravaged with injuries offensively. They look really, really bad right now. And the Broncos just are, a team that scores sometimes. Sometimes they have really bad halves. This is a great matchup here for both of these defenses this week. So New Orleans, obviously, with them, they're actually been a pretty good defense. Like, you obviously have to take out what they just did against the Bucs, because they put up 51 points on the Saints last week. But again, the Broncos offense is not what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have offensively. They just don't have the talent. They do not have the personnel. They just don't have the firepower to be able to put up that many points on the board. So in New Orleans, obviously aggressive defense. They're getting 10. They've had 10 interceptions already. That's only second behind the Green Bay Packers. You've got to play them because Bo Nix has been mistake prone. And then, of course, with the Broncos defense here, they ended up being a worse play last week, and I predicted that. But obviously, this week against the New Orleans Saints, who have been ravaged offensively, this is a matchup I really like. They're getting after the quarterback so much. 22 total sacks this year, 5 interceptions, and they actually have 2 safeties this year. It's ridiculous what the Broncos defense is doing. They're so good in fantasy football. The only thing I'm going to warn people of is that this week, Pat Surtain, the star lockdown corner over there, he's probably not going to play because he suffered a concussion in that loss last week against the Los Angeles Chargers here. So I don't like his chances of playing, but again, Olave's not going to play either because of his concussion. He may not play, so it's kind of evens each other out. They're even Steven as far as I'm concerned, and I like the Broncos for fantasy better. That's why I really like this matchup for both defenses. And another one in this matchup I really like is Bo Nix hitting the higher on his projection on underdog, which is 0.5 total yards in that Thursday night game. Now, here's the deal. You may stress this one a little bit. You may sweat for a little bit here because Bo Nix has a tale of 2 halves sometimes. But of course, he's going to hit this, and you've got to take advantage of it by hitting the higher and going down to the comments and grabbing that link that's there and using code FBEN to sign up for Underdog, where not only will they match your first deposit, 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash, but you'll also be able to take advantage of this Bo Nix sweat-free projection this week. So dropping down to our next tier right here, we've got the Rams defense at number 4 versus the Las Vegas Raiders here. So with the Rams defense, let's get this out of the way. Their defense sucks in fantasy football. It's one of the worst defenses in fantasy. They obviously don't really do anything good. They're not getting after the quarterback really well. They're not getting a bunch of turnovers, and a lot of times they haven't held opponents to very few points. Obviously, the Raiders matchup changes everything here. This was the defense that I said last week, I'm picking them up off the waiver wire and playing them. And I feel the exact same way because the Raiders are a crashing team. They're crashing and burning really fast. They obviously just sent Devontae Adams in a trade to the New York Jets today. He was never going to play for them again anyways. But what if Jacoby Myers doesn't come back? Then what do they have playmaker-wise? This offense sucks. The Raiders are also turning the ball over quite a bunch, so I'm going with the Rams here because I just like to play a really bad offense, and the Raiders are that, so I am going with the Rams here at number 4. And at number 5, I've got the Steelers defense on Sunday night versus the New York Jets at home. Now, here's the deal with the Steelers defense. I keep saying this every week. They've been like this for years. The Steelers defense will get turnovers here. The Steelers defense has 7 interceptions and 6 forced fumbles this year. I mean, they're crushing it. They're making teams look bad offensively. They're actually pretty good. And that's the thing. I think the Jets actually are going to be better offensively moving forward without Nathaniel Hackett calling plays and with Devontae Adams on offense now. But the problem is that I do think this is actually a really good spot for the Steelers because the Jets' offensive line hasn't been able to protect Rodgers this year, and the Steelers can get after the quarterback. So I like the Steelers this week at home in this spot on Sunday night. I think they're going to be a really good play. And then the Chargers defense at 6 to round this tier out. At the Arizona Cardinals on Monday night. It's the second Monday night game. I really don't like those doubleheaders, by the way. But anyways, the Chargers defense is really good in fantasy. Obviously, they had a good week last week. They weren't the number 1 defense as I predicted, but they were still really good in fantasy because they were playing the Broncos. Well, obviously, what we just saw when the Packers played the Cardinals is the Cardinals are so hot and cold. There will be weeks where they go off. There will be weeks where they don't do anything, and a defense can be a really good play. Well, the Chargers, they have the best of both worlds. They're playing that hot and cold team on a Monday night, and I think that the Chargers defense, they're so good. Like the Chargers, they're not getting after the quarterback a ton, but they're getting interceptions. They're getting forced fumbles, and they're just a defense that you can strongly consider playing every single week, regardless of what the matchup is. But I do like this matchup against the Arizona Cardinals on Monday night. That's why they're at number 6. Dropping down to our next tier right here. The Colts defense at number 7, taking on the Miami Dolphins at home. Obviously, I said this weeks ago when I was ranking the rest of season defenses, and I said, listen, the Colts are going to be a really good defense in fantasy football. Mark it down for the next several weeks because the Colts defense is taking on opponents like the Miami Dolphins. And listen, the Colts defense is not some prize in fantasy football. But what the Colts defense can do, and I expect them to do in this game, is they're going to take on the Dolphins here, who are coming off a bye week, but they're still injured. There's no Tua. This offense is atrocious without Tua. Don't forget it just because they were on a bye week. The Dolphins offense sucks. The Colts defense, they can take the ball away, and in certain weeks, they can hit big on explosion sacks. So with a weaker offensive line in Miami, with a horrible quarterback, I like their chances of getting sacks in this game and getting a couple turnovers in this game as well. At number 8, the Packers defense versus the Houston Texans this week. This is the exact same formula, basically, that I used last week. Last week I said when they were taking on the Cardinals, I actually think this is going to be a high-scoring matchup here. But what we can expect is that the Packers defense will get turnovers here. They are the most aggressive defense, arguably in the league right now. They have 9 interceptions, 8 fumble recoveries, 6 forced fumbles, 16 sacks, a defensive touchdown. The Packers defense is everywhere. So again, I don't think they're going to play the Texans really tough as far as like holding them to like 13 or 20 points in the NFL game. I don't think that's what's going to happen here. But I do think that what we've seen from CJ Stroud and this offense, they're really good, very talented, but they are not exactly the cleanest brand of football. They do get sloppy. They do turn the ball over. That's why I like the Packers again. I'm using the exact same formula. I'm expecting a lot of points in this game, and so is Vegas. But this formula is working for fantasy football, and that's why the Packers are still inside the top 10 against a very, very tough opponent this week. The Vikings defense at number 9. It's a very similar thing. They're taking on the Detroit Lions this week, and I would rather play the Texans offense than I would the Detroit Lions offense if I was playing a fantasy defense. Now, I get it. The Vikings defense has been unreal this year in fantasy football. No question about it. 11 interceptions, 20 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and mind you, they were on bye last week. And they're still crushing it in fantasy football. They're averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game. It's ridiculous right now. So their defense is elite. That's why they stay inside the top 10. But again, I don't love this matchup quite as much because it's number 1, a divisional matchup. And number 2, the Detroit Lions have played pretty clean football this year. They really don't turn the ball over much, and obviously they're extremely potent. So I have some worries about this one without question, but the Vikings defense, similar to the Packers, is a great fantasy defense. That's why they're inside the top 10 still. And then dropping down to our last tier, the Falcons defense at number 10 versus the Seattle Seahawks this week. The Falcons defense, I think they're in really good position, similarly to the Vikings and the Packers here. The Seahawks can put up points. They can move the ball against you. There's no question about that. But what the Seahawks do, they have one of the worst turnover differentials in the league right now because Geno Smith is tossing interceptions and there's a lot of just sloppiness offensively that are leading to turnovers, man. So the Atlanta Falcons defense, they're not the greatest defense. They're not the worst defense in fantasy football. But obviously, they're not getting after the quarterback very much. They have 5 sacks this year. They have 5 interceptions though. And that's the number that I like to hit this week. 5 interceptions, comparing that to Geno Smith. And what he's done this year, he's been tossing interceptions, especially if they get up on an early lead on them. And Atlanta's offense is looking really potent right now. So if Atlanta takes this game to where I think they're going to take it, to where they take a lead on the Seahawks will be playing catch up, and that's when Geno Smith gets sloppy. He gets a little wild. He starts throwing interceptions. That's what makes the Falcons defense a top 10 play this week in fantasy. The Ravens defense at number 11, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday night. What are they doing here, right? The Ravens defense has looked horrible in fantasy football. The Ravens defense over the last several weeks, their best game was against Buffalo in week 4 where they had 9 fantasy points. What gives here? Why are they this high, right? Well, there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, the Ravens do get after the quarterback. 19 sacks this year. They're not taking over the ball that much, though. Now, here's the deal. I said this weeks ago when I put them inside the top 12 versus the Cowboys, and that ended up being a really great play. But the reason why I say that the Ravens are back here again against a team that just hung 50 on a divisional opponent is because look at Lamar Jackson's record versus the NFC. These teams don't see Lamar Jackson, so they get wiped out by this team. This team wipes out NFC teams. They just dominate with Lamar Jackson. It's unheard of. So I'm taking that record. I'm taking the chance that the Ravens end up crushing the Bucs and that Baker tosses a couple interceptions. Low points, high interceptions for Baker Mayfield. I like the Ravens here in the top 12 this week. And then the Giants defense at number 12 to round it out versus the Philadelphia Eagles here. Listen, let's just be honest about this one. The Giants defense is actually really good. In fantasy football and in the NFL. The last 3 weeks, here's what they've done. They had 2 points against Dallas. That wasn't a great week. They had 18 points against the Seahawks and 7 points against the Bengals here. They held the Bengals little points and they took the ball over and sacked them. So number one, this game is a divisional game. That makes it unpredictable. Number two is that they come into this game and the Eagles just don't look their best. They barely beat the Browns. Let's get it clear. The Eagles are not looking very good right now. They obviously have tons of firepower, but this defense can take the ball away, and Jalen Hurts is throwing interceptions, and they're fumbling the ball. So this is a good defensive play this week. I think this is going to be a close matchup. The Giants are desperate to get a win. The Eagles have a lot of pressure because their coach looks like an idiot. So I think that the Giants are just in a really good position this week to be a top 12 defense in fantasy. And as I do at the end of every single week, I give you my favorite defense to pick up in advance for next week if you have the roster space. This one I feel really good about because I think they're about to hit a lot of waivers, and they're already on a bunch of waivers already. The Cardinals next week in week 8 are taking on the Miami Dolphins here. Now we'll have to watch this one because Tua's injury return date was supposedly week 8. Now during this week, I've seen some doubt about that floated around. Maybe he doesn't return in week 8. I don't know whether he's going to return or not, but one thing's clear. If Tua isn't back, I'm playing the Cardinals defense because the Dolphins offense sucks. And again, the Cardinals defense can get turnovers and hold opponents to a few points. That's why the Cardinals defense will be a major pickup in advance for week 8. So let me know how your team is looking this week. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receivers for this week, click on this video right here.